Hey reader, welcome back here to the channel. And today we are looking at heavy anti-tank guns. We are coming up on the very end of our series looking at artillery choices in Bolt Action, 3rd edition, with some comparisons back to 2nd edition. And today we're getting into the really, really big boys, right? At this point, we only have, I think, 4 more videos total that we're going to be doing on this series. 5 more videos because we're going to do a separate one on versatile guns as well. And at this point, we are investing substantial points into our guns, and we are only taking these if they fit a specific strategy that we want to accomplish, certain strategic goals that you cannot simply do by taking a lighter or cheaper option reliably. So as always, we're going to be looking at the range and rate of fire. We're going to look at opportunity costs. We're going to look at pin generation versus damage. We're going to look at what we're actually getting by taking a medium anti-tank gun versus a heavy anti-tank gun and why one might make the step up. We're going to look at objective holding, what targets you should prioritize, and we're going to look at some changes I'd recommend, but I'll just say without any of the changes that we have here, I'm not going to lie, I would generally not recommend the heavy AT gun. There is one strategic reason why one might consider taking something like, say, a Pack 40, like you see over there on the side. But in general, you are not going to see me recommending a heavy AT gun as a static field gun piece in general. Okay. So to start off with, between 2nd and 3rd edition, from a range and rate of fire perspective, nothing has changed. We have 72 inches of maximum range, which would give you 36 inches of standard range, where you're not getting that -1 to penetration. And you only get one shot. Right. 2nd edition, of course, you get the -1 to hit. 3rd edition, you kind of have it hard baked in already because you're starting on a 4+ instead of a 3+. But in general, that means that, you're hitting relatively reasonably on that one dice with a pretty long range and a really good penetration modifier. This is effectively a medium anti-tank gun for an extra 12 inches of range and an extra +1 penetration for about 30 to 35 points more, depending on which edition you're looking at. It has the fixed property, so it only fires to the front, which means you would have to advance if the enemy moves beyond a 45-degree traverse to either side of the breach. Okay. This makes it, I think it's fair to say, an expensive artillery choice. This is about 100 points regular in 3rd edition. Though that is admittedly half the cost, more or less, of a Stug 3 or an M4 Sherman 76mm, which means if you wanted to get a heavy anti-tank gun because you like the weapon profile, it is a pretty inexpensive way to do that. It is not inexpensive. Okay. It is still expensive, but for a heavy anti-tank gun, this is the cheapest that you're going to get it. Okay. This is roughly equivalent to about 3 regular light autocannon field guns in 3rd edition. It is roughly equivalent to 2 light anti-tank guns in either edition, equivalent to about 2.5 Piat teams or 2 flamethrower teams. Okay. And so because of that, what you are paying for clearly is firepower. You are not paying for order dice. You are not paying for number of shots per turn. What you are firing at is if you are trying to remove something big, something armored, you are looking for a much more reliable way to do it. Because really the only option of a comparable price that can do it as reliably as a heavy anti-tank gun is maybe the double flamethrowers. Because with the double flamethrowers, they're probably getting to that point blank range in order to actually hit, right? So you're looking at, roughly 3s to hit, depending on which edition you're playing. It's going to be roughly 3s. And then in addition to that, you're looking at, while the penetration itself may not be particularly great on the flamethrower, what they're really trying to do is they're trying to stack those D3 pins and then force the morale check, and the morale check causes the thing to run, right? So depending on what you're shooting at, they could be relatively comparable, but for all of the others, I think it's fair to say you're not going to penetrate serious armor with anywhere close to the same reliability, even with 2 or 3 attempts to shoot in the same turn as you would with a heavy AT gun, okay? This also means that it does cost 20 points more than a Panzerschreck team, but considering that you get a lot of extra range, an extra 48 inches of range. So triple the range that you have on a Panzerschreck team. The fact that it is admittedly fixed and it doesn't have shaped charge, but it does have a gun shield, so guaranteed cover, and double the number of crew. I think it's fair to say that there's a good reason if one is looking at taking a Panzerschreck team to instead take something like a Pack 40. And I mentioned the Pack 40 specifically because it comes in the German Grenadier Starter Army, right? So if you end up picking up the Grenadier Starter Army, which is a second edition Starter Army box, but honestly, I'm not sure it'll even get revised going into third edition because you can build a street legal list for third edition with 4 platoons just out of that one box because it comes with both the Stug 3 and the Puma, right? And honestly, both of those are not horrible options. And one of them even has a heavy AT gun. So you'd have multiple heavy AT guns running around. In that sense, it's a perfectly legit, perfectly reasonable starter army. And you get really good firepower out of it. And you wouldn't have to then also buy a support team box that comes with a Panzerschreck team. So if you were looking at possibly taking a Panzerschreck team, one might just consider buying the Grenadier starter box and just taking the Pack 40 instead. Because it might be an easier delivery system and it might actually do more work for you. From a pin generation perspective, I'm just not going to lie, heavy anti-tank guns, no matter the nation, are not very good. You don't buy them as pin machines. They are, about 37 to 50 points in second edition for each pin that you're going to get. Admittedly, because your pins are actually slightly easier to get in third edition because of the fact that you're actually probably hitting on fours most of the time against people, your pin capacity is slightly better. That being said, 25 to 33 points per pin is not great. So I wouldn't recommend this as a pin generating machine. If you're looking for that, you're looking at autocannons, possibly even howitzers, because of the fact that they have a higher chance of doing more than one pin every single time that you hit a target. What you're really paying for is armor removal. However, something worth noting, unlike the medium anti-tank gun and the light anti-tank gun, it does get the 2-inch HE template in both editions, which means it's like a light howitzer when firing at infantry, which admittedly in third edition is only D2 pins, which is not great. So from a pin generation standpoint, it isn't awesome. But from a damage perspective, as we're about to see, this is a substantial step up. Okay, so we talk about how you have multiple threats, and is an anti-tank gun actually going to be usable against those threats? To be honest, once you cross into the second, this 2-inch HE template threshold, you're actually not horrible at attacking infantry, and you're very good at attacking vehicles. And so you'll find that when we look at damage potential, the chart is actually really good. It's really good, right? I mean, you're looking at reliably, 30 to 40% chance of doing at least one wound to an infantry section, and probably more than that, depending on obviously what kind of unit you're catching, whether they're going down. There's a lot of things to factor in. But you've got a really good chance as long as you're shooting with that 3+ or 4+ to hit, as long as you're not doing an advance order, you have a really good chance of doing damage. And against vehicles, you'll notice even the highest end, even looking at a damage value 11 vehicle that you're taking from the front, you have about a 1 in 6 chance, as long as you hit the target, of actually doing actual damage to them, right? Like you actually get to roll on the damage chart for something serious. And then obviously beyond that, you've got some potential in case you're hitting from the side or from the rear, although that is not particularly common. The most common way you're going to get a rear shot with a heavy AT gun is if the enemy comes in on your board edge in fog of war or something like that. But it could happen, right? I mean, those scenarios do exist, and they are more common in third edition now than they were in second edition. But in general, even in that sweet spot where you're looking at most people taking tanks that are around a damage value of 8 or 9 or even 10, I mean, you got a 1 in 6 chance, but just by saying, I declare a fire action, I'm firing at this unit, that you're actually going to get to roll for damage on the damage chart, which is not horrible, right? And even with an advance action, it's about 1 in 6, 1 in 7 that you're going to get to, get what you want out of the shot that you're taking, which is not bad, honestly. So on the whole, from a damage perspective, this thing punches hard. This is a very, very reliable means. As long as you are able to line up targets that you want and then shoot at them, you actually have a pretty good chance of doing removal every single turn. Are you going to remove 100 to 110 points worth of guys? That's an excellent question. But your chance of actually doing damage is quite high, which is excellent. So if you're looking for a damage tool, and this is why I say there's like one case from a strategic perspective why you would want to take a heavy AT gun, and that is you're not actually interested in just pinning vehicles, right? You think that there's going to be a company commander riding in an armored transport behind a bunch of tanks. And so pins don't actually mean that much against those vehicles. You need to actually knock them out, or you need to immobilize them, or something like that. If that's what you're looking for, heavy AT gun, relatively inexpensive way to actually accomplish that objective, especially since, again, it's about half the cost of a Stug 3 or a Sherman M60, 76 millimeter that do the exact same damage, right? You could take two of them and put them in different parts of the battlefield because maybe you don't know where the enemy armor is going to be. And when you line that up, you know that you've got a really good chance of shooting them down. And if the enemy is running more infantry heavy, good news, you still have really good stats against infantry, right? Because you get that 2-inch NG template. So you're catching quite a few people in there, at least 4 models or so, assuming that the squad is at least 4 models. And you've got a really good chance of actually wounding them, probably a 2+ on most of what you're looking at. So on the whole, from a damage potential, really good. So why would one take a heavy AT gun by comparison to a medium AT gun? And so for this, we're gonna take just a quick look at kind of the breakdown. We're starting with a medium anti-tank gun. The primary reason why you like these is because you're getting comparable damage against inexperienced troops, which is a lot of, like light mortar teams, possibly machine gun teams, other team weapons where people were just trying to save some points because they wanted to run a ton of them, or they just wanted to sneak an extra order dice in. You might see them on infantry sections if people are trying to go cheaper on infantry sections, so that way they can take more armor, for example. This does come up, and so a medium AT gun is going to do just as well as a heavy AT gun against those targets. They'll also do basically just as well against a damage value 6 or damage value 7 vehicle. So, if somebody's running light transports to run things up, or really, really cheap attack vehicles on like a truck chassis, with some sort of heavy weapon mounted in the bed, if they're running damage value 7 armored transports, a lot of the half tracks are damage value 7 plus. You've got a couple of wheeled vehicles like the Berlier that are also 7 plus. Tracked vehicles like the Bren carrier. The medium AT gun is just as good, basically, as you're going to be looking at with the heavy AT gun. It is marginally worse against damage value 4 and 5, so your regulars and veterans, as well as against 8 and 9, your light and medium tanks. But it is still decent against all of those things. You are also looking at roughly +1 order dice worth of point savings. You're saving about 30 points, which is, an AT rifle team, a mortar team, a light mortar team at least, can easily fit into those. So you are losing order dice by virtue of taking this. And that just makes sense, right? Because you're taking a team that's more expensive, right? Behind the field gun. You are losing an order dice on average because of this. But note, it's only about 1 order dice between a medium anti-tank gun and a heavy anti-tank gun. It's probably closer to 1 to 2 if you're taking like a light AT gun. But at least for the medium AT gun comparison and why you would make the step up, it's only a drop of -1, which is not horrible. Okay. The medium AT gun also does have a smaller footprint, because it only has 3 guys instead of 4. And the guns do tend to be smaller physically as well, so you can fit them into smaller areas. That also means it is easier to take advantage of cover, because you could have one dude sitting behind the gun is ignored for the purpose of considering cover, and have the other 2 dudes sitting within, within unit cohesion of the gun, but behind a building, right? or something like that. And thus, half or more of the crew are behind heavy cover, and thus the gun counts as being under heavy cover. Okay. Of course, the problem with this whole theory is that while you do have a smaller footprint, there are trade-offs. And so what the heavy AT gun gets is that you are obviously way more reliable against actual serious armor. If you're hitting even damage value 8, much more reliable removal. But against 9, 10, 11, not actually what the medium AT gun excels at. And the heavy AT gun is actually quite good against all of them. Which is really good. You are also more likely to remove infantry. So it is actually more of a flex tool. And for only 30 points more, being able to be good against infantry, good against pretty much any vehicle that comes, is actually probably worth the points. So if you were looking at a medium AT gun and you're playing one of those major nations that gets access to a heavy AT gun, you might consider taking a Pack 40 over a Pack 38. You might consider taking this British gun over and against a medium anti-tank gun instead. Okay. The other thing is it is a more resilient objective holder, and that's where we'll take a look at objective holding. Now, everything here is pretty much great with the one obvious exception that we have the major drawbacks that have been true for all of the field guns that we've been looking at really since we got out of the light category. First of all, you do get 4 men instead of 3, like most of the artillery choices get. You get baked in cover automatically because you have the gun shield. Okay. And you're probably taking this at regular. So it's only a 4+ to wound, which is not bad for an objective holding unit. And obviously, the fact that you can pretty easily take advantage of a cover benefit, even from other angles, by virtue of placing it within a ruin, for example, if you don't feel like you need to move it, then you can actually get better cover even than you get from the gun shield. This has excellent anti-armor damage capability on an ambush. So if somebody's doing an armored thrust to move in, maybe provide cover for infantry that are behind it so they can clear an objective. This is actually a really good way of knocking out that armor on approach so that they never get to within range to contest an objective. They never get within range to be able to provide cover for other infantry moving up. You can whittle down in advance by virtue of having one or two of these sitting to protect an objective. It has a very long reach to support advancing troops. So after you've controlled one objective, maybe even as early as the start of the game, you can be covering your men as you are going on to another objective that is within line of sight of this. You do get the ability to reactive fire if assaulted, which makes you better than a mortar and better than a multiple rocket launcher. Admittedly, also with a 2-inch HE template, but it does have to be from the front because like all of these artillery, it's not on a rotating platform, so it doesn't get the 360-degree range of fire. Okay. But it does come with some drawbacks. First of all, you are fixed. You can't move and shoot in the same turn. So doing a rolling defense of an objective where you start on the far forward side of the objective and then you fall back 6 inches and then you shoot at the enemy, you can't do like you can with, say, infantry-based anti-tank teams. But hey, I mean, what are you going to ask, right? I mean, these things are really heavy in real life, right? It makes sense from a rules perspective that they're not going to, allow you to not have the fixed weapon property. They're going to make you be fixed. So it's fine, right? We come to expect this from the artillery team. It's fine. You are bait for mortars and howitzers, okay? Because most howitzers shooting at you are going to be making their points back if they just remove you over the course of the game. Every mortar is going to make its points back just by shooting at you. It's probably even worthwhile for 2 or 3 medium mortars, 3 to 4 light mortars to just work on you for a couple turns. They're actually probably still doing just fine in terms of a points reallocation perspective, right? And that's not the greatest. It could be worse. You are also, of course, passing up an order dice that could stake the objective as well, right? And this is something to think about, right? A medium AT gun and a regular anti-tank rifle team can fulfill similar styles of roles as a heavy AT gun. But if the opponent starts mortar hunting them, there are 2 of them. So removing one of them means you still hold the objective. They haven't completed their task by just removing the team behind the AT gun, right? So that's one thing to think about. And as we mentioned on the medium AT gun video and a little bit on the light AT gun video as well, you do get a bit of a redundant gun shield, right? Where in an ideal world, you're not putting this thing out in the open where you're taking advantage of the 5+ cover save. You're putting it in a position where you can probably get something like a 4+ cover save because you don't want machine guns for super cheap removing your 100-point regular heavy anti-tank gun. But that means that the gun shield isn't actually doing anything for you, right? It's redundant. You don't get a 4+ save from cover and then another 5+ save coming from your gun shield. So on the whole, is it good for objective holding? I think the answer is obviously yes. This is a very good tool for objective holding, like most artillery pieces. Just realize that you do have some drawbacks that the enemy can exploit relatively easily. And I would argue they can exploit more easily against a heavy AT gun than they can against a light or a medium AT gun. So in terms of target prioritization, what kinds of things do you want to be shooting at? Honestly, you want really any transport or tow. There's a very good chance, since they're probably a maximum of damage value 7, you do admittedly have those kangaroos, right? And really, really big transports that get up to like actual serious armor value of defense. But in general, 7+, 6+, 3+ in the case of some tows that you're gonna be looking at, it's probably going to be hit on a 3+, wound very easily, probably on 2s, even at long range. And then you're rolling for damage on the chart. And if you're getting a 5 or a 6, you're probably removing the vehicle, even if they're rolling on the chart, right? So because of that, very reliable. And the fact that transports specifically often have men in them and were intentionally being taken in order to actually get to a place on the battlefield means that you are probably doing good work for the squad and disrupting what your opponent is doing all at once, right? And so in that sense, Very, very good, very reliable. You want to have those targets. You are also really good against lightly armored fighting vehicles. Anything's damage value 7, damage value 8, those little recce tankettes and stuff like that. If you can actually hit them and they can't wreck you away from you, they're a really, really good choice, right? And this means that combining these with other aspects, other fighting vehicles with, say, autocannons that may be able to trigger the recce to move them and push them in a direction where you can now shoot at them, is really good, right? It also means that fighting on ambush with these things is a really good decision because then when a vehicle decides it wants to move up and actually attack a vehicle, you might get a chance to shoot at them. And because they're actually activating, you're not shooting at a unit that hasn't activated yet. That is a really good chance to be able to do some good removal. Okay. You are also pretty good against serious armored vehicles. In fact, arguably better at taking on those than you are at taking on infantry sections. Because again, you're getting that 3+ to hit. So you're doing at least a pin, more likely, than you are at doing comparable shots at infantry because you don't get that extra +1 to hit. And your chance of removal is actually pretty darn good. So in that sense, I'd say go ahead and keep shooting at the big armor. This is what you paid this for. Otherwise, you might as well have taken a medium AT gun. It's probably better if you're not going after serious armored vehicles. And then when you're looking at inexperienced and regular team weapons, the biggest advantage you have here is probably a 4+ to hit. Admittedly, you have to be in line of sight, fair enough. But you know what? So does an AT rifle team, so does a machine gun team when it comes to shooting at you and trying to do pins, if not removal, against your crew. And the fact that you get a 2-inch HE template means you're probably covering the whole team weapon. Probably, right? I mean, there are some team weapons that, maybe because they put them all in a straight line and they got 4 men, you may not be able to cover all of them, but you could cover 3 of them, which is pretty darn good. So, well, maybe not quite 3. It all depends on how they stack it up, but you can probably at least catch 2, maybe 3, depending on how it goes, which means you could wipe the entire, you could wipe out half the team or the entire team, depending on how many men they have. And that means at least a morale check, if not removal of the order dice, right? And even if they choose to go down against you, you actually still have a pretty decent chance of at least doing 1 wound to them, which is not horrible. Artillery choices, generally, you're a really good shot at. One, because most artillery choices can't fire indirect. So if they can see you, you can see them. And you're punching way harder than they are with the 2-inch HE template. They're probably shooting back with a 1-inch HE template. So they're probably catching 1, maybe 2 of your dudes at a time. And you're catching 2, maybe 3 of their dudes, possibly the entire team at a time, right? You're also starting with more wounds generally than they have. So in a war of attrition between the two of you, you probably last longer than they do, right? Because you're wounding better with the +2 to wound instead of the +1 to wound. You're catching more guys, and you have more guys to start with. So you're probably winning that fight. And then finally, you have the regular veteran infantry sections. These are also fine to go after, except that they are likely to be shooting enough volume back at you that they are removing more of you than you are removing of them. And that's bad news when you only start with 4 dudes. So in general, I think that's kind of what you would want to line up for. But honestly, choosing any of these targets, you're doing fine, right? I mean, you're doing great against any of these things. The one thing I would recommend not shooting at in general, unless there's nothing better to shoot at, is inexperienced infantry teams. You're not going to make a lot of points back shooting at a 7 or 8 man home guard unit, for example. You're not going to actually remove much off of the enemy's plate for the amount of firepower you're trying to throw at it. Okay, that's the one thing that I think you're not really well versatile to take on here. So what would I recommend? Honestly, and this is going to be obvious, it's a points reduction. Right, it's just too expensive for what you're at. I think 80 to 85 points regular, maybe 90, puts you so that it's still a substantial step up, about 20 points up above where I would place the points cost for a medium anti-tank gun. You're getting good value for that extra 20 points that you're putting in. And most importantly, what we're doing is we're pricing this to be comparable to an infantry squad, a 5-man infantry squad with 2 Panzerfausts. Because while Panzerfausts are a one-shot weapon, you can fire both of them in a single turn, which makes them quite effective because even though you have to get pretty close and they're one shots, you're probably hitting on around close to 3s, probably, because you're relatively easy to get within point blank range. You're getting 2 shots looking for those 3s, so the chance you hit on a given turn is very high. And they're still getting that pen +6 with no penalty for long range. So you're guaranteeing yourself a +6 to penetration, whereas your average Pack 40 might be only getting a +5, depending on how far away they're shooting. They might be shooting beyond 36 inches, in which case you're not actually as good as damaging as a Panzerfaust is. But I think if that's where we're roughly pricing it, somebody would look at it and would say, okay, it might actually be worth it to take a static field gun to do my anti-tank because it's not that much of an investment, right? They're dropping one infantry section to take it. They're dropping one very, very, very light vehicle, probably only with a machine gun, in order to take it. This is actually a pretty good choice if that's what you're looking at. But again, strategically, the whole reason why somebody would take a heavy anti-tank gun would be one, it's just thematic, right? You know, this is what people were using. It was heavily used during the war by the Waffen SS or whatever. Or they're looking to actually remove serious armor. They see people running veteran medium tanks, and veteran medium tanks are going to be very anti-aircraft gun resistant. They're going to be anti-tank rifle resistant. They're going to be mostly mortar resistant. And so because of that, they're looking at it saying, I just think that this is, I need something serious that can seriously punch it. I'm not just trying to pin things because morale bubbles from officers can fix those problems. I'm looking to actually remove things and to do removal. This is actually one of the cheapest ways to do it. Whether you're looking at AT guns, howitzers, whatever it is that you're trying to do, this is reliable and it's relatively cheap. So you might consider taking it. In general, I tend to leave these home, but I do own a few because sometimes I look at it and I say, you know, my opponent might run a heavy tank. They might even run a super heavy tank. And if they do, I want to have a serious actual answer to them, not just throw some pins down and hope that they didn't take a company commander. And if that's the case, you might consider looking at some of these. But did I miss something? Am I hyping up the ability to take on heavy armor a little too much? Is that actually not reliable or reasonable to see, whether you're going to a casual event or a competitive event? Am I hyping up the 2-inch HE template too much? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.